All right, happy Friday. This is going to be kind of a rundown of Act 3, Scene 5, the last scene in Act 3. And then I also want to give you some important information just about what to expect from next week and kind of what else is going on basically for this class. So make sure that you pay attention to all of that information because some of it is pretty important for you to know. All right, Act 3, Scene 5. So we start off this scene with Romeo and Juliet the morning after they spent the night together, kind of finally been able to have some alone time together to celebrate their marriage, all that kind of stuff. And then Romeo realizes it's the morning and he needs to get out of there. Then they kind of go back and forth for a while about like, no, don't go. No, I want to stay, but I have to go. And like all this back and forth about how sad they are to be leaving each other. But ultimately, Romeo knows he has to leave, especially because Juliet's mother wants to come talk to her. We find out the nurse tells her that her mother is looking for her. So they say their goodbyes and Romeo climbs down from her balcony and she looks down at him and says what is actually a very ironic line considering that we know that Romeo and Juliet both die at the end of the play. And she looks down at him and she says, "You're looking sickly ill. You look like someone in their tomb. It's like I'm looking down at a dead man." And that's some foreshadowing that Shakespeare put in there for Juliet because she's kind of looking down at Romeo and seeing how kind of sickly, sad, and deathly he's looking, and she's kind of starting to already be thinking about grieving the loss of him and imagining him being dead and that kind of stuff. And that's just some foreshadowing and some irony that Shakespeare throws in there since us as the audience know that Romeo is going to die. And so Juliet's kind of starting to cue in on that same thing, that there's not really a way out of this situation they're in without Romeo dying. So we're starting to see her sort of start to get a glimpse of that realization. Then Romeo leaves and the nurse comes in and Juliet's mother comes in. And Juliet's mother talks to her about the plans that they have for her to marry Paris on Thursday. So now it's Tuesday, it's the next day, so only 2 days away until this wedding. And Lady Capulet thinks that Juliet's going to be really excited by this news. She kind of berates her a little bit for still crying and grieving so much over Tybalt. And then Juliet talks about how just she's grieving so much, that's why she's crying so much. She's kind of making these excuses that it's all about Tybalt, so that her mother doesn't know that her sadness is actually really truly about Romeo's banishment and about how she's in love with the man who kind of betrayed their family and all that kind of information. So Lady Capulet's under the impression that Juliet is just like really, really depressed because of Tybalt's death, and so she thinks that Juliet will be really happy and really receptive of this information about her wedding to Paris. Juliet obviously is not. She's devastated. She's already married to Romeo, so she knows she can't marry Paris anyway, and she's just like having a really hard time processing all of that. And she expresses that to her mother, that she doesn't want to marry Paris. She feels she's too young, she's too upset, she's still grieving. There's no way that they could expect her to get married at this time, all this different stuff that she tells her mother. And then her father comes in and essentially is really verbally abusive to her. He tells her that she needs to be thankful to them for setting up this marriage, and she needs to be grateful that they found someone to love her, and that she's not a blessing to them, she's a curse because of her ungratefulness. And essentially just tells her that he calls her a hussy straight up, like that's the wording that he uses, and says like, there's no point in us parenting you anymore. You can either marry Paris on Thursday and go off to be with him, or you can kind of banish yourself as well. So that's sort of the situation that her father puts her in, making it very clear to Juliet that her family doesn't really value her as an independent person, and all they want for her is to get married to Paris and go off with him. So that's kind of where Juliet's at. So she's even more heartbroken and crushed than she was before, and she talks about kind of wanting to escape, wanting to leave, and then we find out that Lady Capulet has made this plan to kill Romeo, and she thinks this is some information that's going to be good news to Juliet, because remember, she thinks Juliet is so depressed because she's mourning Tybalt still. So Lady Capulet says, well, maybe now that you know about our revenge plan, you'll be able to get over this whole Tybalt thing, and then you'll be able to marry Paris and kind of get back in our good graces, and this will all be behind us. And obviously Juliet is devastated to hear this plan, so she convinces her mother, let me be the one who mixes the poison into this drink that we're going to give to him. Let me be the one to do all of this. So Juliet's trying to kind of step in and make sure that when they send someone to poison Romeo in Mantua, because they know that that's where he went to following his banishment, that Juliet can intervene there and try to save his life. And in doing so, she'll basically fall out of her own family's good graces, and then she'll just run away with Romeo. So Juliet's obviously upset because no matter what, no matter how this ends, she's going to lose her family, but she would rather lose her family than lose her family and Romeo. So she kind of convinces herself in this moment to be the one to poison Romeo herself, to kind of take this upon herself so that she can come up with a plan to save him, and so that he and her can kind of live in this us against the world reality where they run away together and maybe potentially live happily ever after. But Juliet is still really crushed. She's still mourning a lot. She's still processing through a lot of the emotions she has toward Romeo. She's still not totally 100% over the fact that he killed Tybalt. She's really processing and grieving that. So while she's dealing with all of this, she decides to go talk to Friar Laurence. She tells her mother that the reason she's going there is to do confession so that she can confess for the ungratefulness that her parents accused her of for not being willing to marry Paris. And so she goes there to talk to Friar Laurence and hopefully hatch a plan where she can go to Mantua and pretend that she's going to be the one to poison Romeo, when in reality she's going to go there and kind of save him and they can run away together. So hopefully that kind of explains what's going on in scene 5. This is a really pivotal point in this play because we find out what the Capulet family wants to do about Romeo. We find out about her parents' really kind of verbally abusive way that they've been raising Juliet, kind of explaining why she's so dependent on the love that Romeo has for her. It's kind of the first actual real affection she's ever felt besides her nurse, and so she's really attached to that. We see Romeo just continuing to be a dramatic person. He's the worst. And now we see Juliet kind of trying to take her destiny into her own hands, go talk to Friar Laurence, figure out a plan, kind of save the day herself. So that's what's going on right now. Act 4 will kind of show how their whole plan unfolds, what's all going to happen. Lots of action happens in Act 4. It's a really quick moving scene. And then Act 5 is really short. So I want you to try to read Act 4 by next Tuesday or Wednesday. Try to be finished with Act 4 by then. On Tuesday, I'm going to post the comprehension questions for Act 4. Then I need you to read 5 on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday if you can, and so that you're completely finished with the play by next Friday, a week from today. So that's kind of your timeline in order to finish this play. Do a little bit at a time. If you do about a scene a day, maybe 2 scenes a day, that's really all you'll need to do to stay on track. And then on Tuesday and on Thursday, I'll post comprehension questions for Act 4 and then Act 5. And then Friday, you will have a comprehensive test. So I haven't totally figured out the way that I want to do that yet, but I'm probably going to post a Quizlet or a Kahoot that you can do remotely. So you'll be able to log in and take the quiz and it'll send me your results. But obviously, you're going to be allowed to use notes and any kind of thing like that that you need to complete the test. And that's kind of my plan for it. And then when you come back on Monday, March 30th, we probably won't have that day off anymore. I don't know for sure yet, but that's probably what's going to happen. So Monday, March 30th, when you come back into school, I will give you your final project for Romeo and Juliet, and then we'll spend the next week working on that. And then that way you have all that done and we're completely done Romeo and Juliet going into Easter break. And then after Easter, we can start poetry. So that way we don't lose any time. We're on the schedule that we would have been on anyway. If you have any questions about anything, if you're lost in Romeo and Juliet, if the comprehension questions are confusing to you in any way, if you just need help at all, just please shoot me an email, comment on something on Classroom, anything like that. Yeah, hope you guys have a good weekend. Thank you for your work this week. Thank you especially to those of you who've been working really hard to get all of your missing work in, who've been staying on top of assignments, all that kind of stuff. I miss you guys. Can't wait to see you in 2 weeks. Bye.